It didn't take long before news of the moat spread through the neighborhood. People walked by slowly, some pretending to be out for a stroll, others openly stopping to stare and take photos. It wasn't every day you saw a perfectly dug moat, filled with water surrounding a property fence, and certainly not in a quiet suburban neighborhood. I was sitting on my porch one morning sipping coffee when the mailman paused at the edge of the driveway, eyes wide. "You really went all in, huh?" he said, trying not to laugh. I just smiled. "Well, it's on my land," I replied. "That's the theme, right?" But not everyone was amused. 3 days after finishing the moat, I got a knock at the door. It was the same neighbor, arms folded, mouth tight, with a police officer standing beside him. I took a deep breath, nodded, and invited them onto the porch. The officer was polite but clearly confused. "Sir, your neighbor claims you've created a hazard around his fence. Can you explain what's going on here?" I handed him a copy of the land survey, clearly showing the fence was 5 feet. "Into my property." Then I showed him photos of the moat construction, every step documented with timestamps, proving I'd stayed within my rights. The officer flipped through the documents, scratched his head, and finally said, "Well, I can't say I've ever dealt with this before, but from what I see here, you haven't broken any laws." My neighbor turned red, started yelling, accusing me of trying to ruin his life, of humiliating him in front of the whole block. I looked him square in the eyes and calmly replied, "You humiliated yourself the moment you built that fence, without asking." I asked nicely, remember? The officer eventually left, telling my neighbor that this was a civil matter, and unless he could prove damage or danger, there was nothing more they could do. And so, the moat stayed. At first, it was just water, but as the weeks passed, I started getting creative. I installed a small wooden bridge over it for my mower and wheelbarrow to pass, then added solar-powered lights along the edge. I planted water lilies and floated a few decorative lanterns in the evenings. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now waved as they passed, and more than once, someone shouted, "Love what you did with the place!" But the best part? My neighbor stayed quiet. For the first time since he moved in, there were no loud backyard parties, no trash bags tossed over the fence, no barking dogs let loose at 6 a.m. He avoided eye contact. His family walked faster when leaving the house. It was as if the moat wasn't just water. It was a line he finally couldn't cross. One day, about a month later, I saw him in the backyard, alone, standing next to the fence. He looked at the water, then up at me. I nodded politely. He didn't say a word but gave a single slow nod in return. Then he walked back inside. That's when I realized I hadn't just defended my land. I had created a boundary both physical and symbolic, one that reminded him and everyone else that respect has to go both ways. You can't stomp into someone's life, take what isn't yours, and expect no consequences. Later that summer, I hosted a small barbecue for the block. Nothing fancy, just burgers, music, laughter. People gathered in the backyard, admired the moat, asked questions about how I'd built it, and one even joked, "You should start a YouTube channel for neighbor revenge stories." We laughed. Then someone pointed at the edge of the property and said, "Hey, look who's coming." I turned and saw my neighbor, walking slowly down the path with his wife. He wasn't carrying food or a drink. He looked unsure, maybe even a little embarrassed. I walked over to him, hands in my pockets. He cleared his throat. I just wanted to say, maybe things got a little out of hand." I waited. "I mean, I shouldn't have built that fence. You were right, and, well, I've been thinking. If you ever want it moved, I'm willing to talk about it." I nodded. "Appreciate that. But maybe leave it for now. It tells a good story." He chuckled awkwardly. "Yeah, I guess it does." We didn't shake hands, but he stayed for a little while, stood near the grill, made small talk with the others. And for once, the tension wasn't there. It was just a summer evening, with people gathered around, telling stories, kids laughing, lights reflecting in the water. After everyone left and the yard was quiet again, I sat on my porch, looked out over the moat, and thought about how strange life can be. One small action, a line in the dirt, can lead to a chain reaction you never see coming. But sometimes, standing your ground isn't just about proving a point. It's about reclaiming your peace. And in the end, I had mine. I had lived on that piece of land for over 15 years. It wasn't huge, but it was mine. I bought it after a tough divorce, when I had nothing but a beat-up pickup, a small savings account, and a head full of regrets. That land saved me. I built the house myself, plank by plank, with calloused hands and long, silent days. The trees on the back edge gave me shade in the summer and firewood in the winter. The creek that curled through the eastern side whispered to me when I couldn't sleep. It was peace, the kind of peace you fight for. And I fought hard to keep it. So when my new neighbors moved in and started hammering posts into what was clearly my land, something inside me cracked. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I gave them the benefit of the doubt. A young couple probably didn't know where the property line ran. I brought them a pie. That's what decent neighbors do, right? I knocked on their door, offered a smile, and pointed out, gently, that the fence they were building was a few feet into my side. They smiled too, nodded, apologized, said they'd fix it. But they never did. A week later, not only was the fence still there, it had grown, taller, sharper, and now it cut directly through my vegetable garden. I stood there, looking at my ruined squash patch, and felt the kind of cold anger that starts in the chest and crawls outward. Again, I tried to talk. I knocked on their door. No answer. I called. No reply. I left a note. Nothing changed. That's when I realized something important. They weren't confused. They weren't unaware. They were testing me. You see, this wasn't just about a fence. It was about territory, about control. Maybe they thought I was old, alone. Maybe they thought I wouldn't fight back, but they didn't know what kind of man I used to be. I may live quiet now, but quiet doesn't mean soft. And I don't roll over for bullies. Not anymore. So I did what any man with a shovel, time, and a stubborn heart would do. I started digging. It began on a Monday morning. I walked out before sunrise, took my old steel shovel from the shed, and put its blade into the earth right along the edge of their new fence. Inch by inch, foot by foot, I worked. I didn't say a word. I didn't knock on their door. I just kept digging. The first day, it was just a narrow trench. By day 3, I had circled half their property. By day 7, the trench was waist deep. 6 feet wide and lined with stone I hauled from the creek bed. They watched me. I knew they did. I'd see the curtains twitch. I'd feel their eyes, but they never came out. Not once. Maybe they thought I'd get tired. Maybe they thought I was bluffing. I wasn't. I kept going. Day after day, sweating under the sun, my hands blistered, back aching, but my focus sharp. I bought a pump. Rerouted a stream, filled the trench with water. The frogs came first, then dragonflies. By the end of the second week, their yard was surrounded by a calm, glimmering moat. They woke up to find themselves on an island. I didn't speak a word to them, didn't smile, didn't gloat, just stood by my fence, my actual fence, the one still on my land, and sipped coffee as they peeked through their blinds. That's when the calls started. First, it was the wife. She knocked on my door, suddenly all warm and polite. "Can we talk?" she asked. I leaned on my doorframe and shrugged. "You had your chance," I said. She looked confused. "It's just a fence." I shook my head. "No, ma'am, it's a line." Then the husband came by, not so polite. Tried to threaten me with lawyers. I pointed at the original survey stakes still in the ground, showed him the paperwork. He went red in the face and walked away, muttering. They called the sheriff. He came out, had a cup of coffee with me while we stood by the moat. I showed him the survey, the pictures, the timeline. He nodded, said, "You're within your rights." I smiled and offered him a donut. A few days later, they tried building a little bridge, some wooden planks laid across the water. I watched them hammer and sweat and argue with each other as they worked. The next morning, I removed the planks. Quietly, gently, didn't damage a thing. Just pulled them aside and stacked them neatly, on their lawn. Message received. They never tried again. But the story doesn't end there, because something changed in me. While building that moat, I realized I wasn't just defending my land. I was reclaiming a part of myself. The part that used to believe in boundaries, not just on paper, but in life. I remembered who I was before I lost so much. I remembered the satisfaction of building something real, something no one could take away. I began to upgrade the moat. I planted wildflowers along its edges, added stepping stones, solar lights, a small footbridge just for me. At night, I'd sit outside and listen to the frogs sing, watch the moonlight ripple on the surface, and feel a peace I hadn't felt in years. The neighbors? They stayed quiet. They mowed their tiny lawn in awkward silence. The husband stopped waving. The wife looked down when she passed me in the driveway. Eventually, they put up their house for sale. I didn't celebrate. I didn't mock them. I just nodded to myself and whispered, "Next time, think twice." And that's the thing. Some people think kindness is weakness, that if you live quiet, you must be soft. But they forget the quietest people are often the ones who've survived the most, who've already been through fire and come out the other side. We build our peace brick by brick, and we don't let anyone tear it down without a fight. So if you ever feel pushed, disrespected, ignored, remember this. You don't have to shout. You don't have to beg. Sometimes you just need a shovel and patience. Because some lines aren't just drawn, they're dug deep, filled with water and lined with stone. And once they're there, they stay. I didn't sleep that night. I just stared at the ceiling, thinking how everything escalated from a simple disagreement to this level of ridiculousness. I wasn't mad anymore. No, something deeper had taken root. I felt wronged, cornered, disrespected, and I wasn't going to let it slide. So the next morning, I made coffee, stepped outside, and stared at that hideous fence. It stood there like a smirk, a wooden insult nailed into the ground I paid for. I made a few calls, not to lawyers. That would take weeks. No, I called a buddy of mine, Kyle. Kyle owned some heavy machinery, excavators, bulldozers, the whole deal. He was the kind of guy you called when you needed land cleared or a pool dug, or in my case, a moat. He answered in his usual way. "What's up, trouble?" I said, "How deep can you dig around a property?" There was a pause, then laughter. "What did your neighbors do now?" "Built a fence," I said. Kyle sighed. "On your side again?" "Yeah, but I don't want it removed." Another pause. "I want a moat dug around their fence." Silence. Then Kyle said, "You serious?" I said, "Dead serious." By the time the sun was high, Kyle was out front with his crew. When he saw the fence, he whistled. "They're bold. I want a trench 4 feet wide, 3 feet deep. All around the fence. Don't touch their property line, just right up against it." Kyle nodded. "We'll need to mark the lines. You got permits?" I handed him the survey papers. "I'm well within my rights." "All right," he said. "Let's start digging." The sound of that first scoop was beautiful. The neighbors came out about 20 minutes later. The wife stood with her arms crossed, watching. Her husband tried to act casual, leaning on their car like nothing was happening. But I could see it in their faces. Confusion, then irritation, then a dawning sense of dread. They didn't come. Talk to me. They just stood there, watching. Kyle's guys kept working. The trench took shape quickly. The fence now looked like it was perched on an island. When the wife finally snapped, she stormed over. "What do you think you're doing?" I smiled. "Landscaping." "You're digging a trench around our property," I corrected her. "I'm digging a trench around your fence. On my property." "You're being childish," she snapped. I shrugged. "Maybe. But I didn't put a fence on your land." Her face flushed. "This is harassment." "No," I said calmly. "This is construction. Would you like to file a complaint? Maybe to the same police chief who was at my BBQ last month?" Banem looked stunned. That's when she realized I wasn't bluffing. That maybe, just maybe, she had finally messed with the wrong person. She walked away without another word. By late afternoon, the trench was done. It surrounded the entire fence on 3 sides. I didn't dig along the street-facing side. I wasn't looking for trouble with the city. But the rest, a neat little moat with smooth dirt walls and sharp edges. I sat on a lawn chair and admired it like it was art. And in a way, it was. The neighbors didn't talk to me for days. They just stared. I knew they were trying to figure out what to do. But what could they do? I didn't damage anything. I didn't trespass. I didn't even touch their fence. All I did was make it look ridiculous, isolated on a patch of dirt, surrounded by a shallow canyon. But I wasn't done yet. A few days later, I ordered pond liner. Waterproof, heavy-duty, and perfect for the moat. I laid it in and filled it with water from my well. It wasn't deep, maybe a foot of water, but it was enough to reflect the sun and shimmer like a real moat. Then I added koi fish, bright orange ones that darted through the water, making it look almost peaceful. By now, the neighborhood was talking. People slowed down as they drove by. Some even walked past just to stare. A couple kids pointed and laughed. My neighbor? He just stood on his porch and rubbed his face like he had a migraine. But it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about message. I was making it very clear. I don't get pushed around. The real kicker came when the mailman came by and said, "That's the most polite middle finger I've ever seen." I laughed. That's the goal. Still, I wasn't naive. I knew this wouldn't end here. People like them don't back down. They dig in. They try to twist things, flip the narrative, and sure enough, I got a letter the following week. From their lawyer, it was a cease and desist, claiming the moat was a safety hazard, that someone could fall in and hurt themselves, that it created emotional distress, that it was retaliatory and petty. I handed the letter to my own lawyer, who chuckled and said, "This is what they're going with?" He drafted a response, clear, firm, and backed with the same survey maps and permit approvals I had used to dig. They had nothing. They didn't respond after that. But the real satisfaction came when the city inspectors came by for a routine neighborhood check. One of them, clipboard in hand, asked about the pond. "Decorative," I said. "Fish and everything." He nodded. "Nice work." No fines, no warnings, just respect. A month later, the fence was gone. They didn't tell me. They didn't ask. They just took it down one morning when I was at work. When I came back, all that was left were empty post holes and muddy footprints. I stood by the water, watching the fish swim circles around what used to be their fence. And for the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Sometimes you fight back not to win, but to remind people you won't lose. And in that quiet, koi-filled trench, I had done just that.